let you introduce us.
All right, hello, welcome to the Mongols podcast. This is Sam Y.J. Morgenstern, otherwise known as Janos Yalich. Happy New Year. And here we have the best guest on the Mongols podcast, the wonderful, amazing Jack Wilson.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me back on again, Janos. It's been a while. Happy 2021 to yourself, your family, and everyone listening.
Yeah, it's so far not too bad. We haven't exactly had any new disasters yet.
Well, it'll be saving a good one, I'm sure.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, let's not jinx it, eh?
Indeed. So, anyways, as many might know, Jackmeister is in the process of writing a thesis for his graduate program, talking about the notable Nogai Khan of the Ulus Jochi, otherwise known as the Golden Horde. So, anyways, I decided to invite him on here for a nice, pretty decently long interview. So just as kind of the first question, could you, give us a rundown / short version of who Nogai Khan is?
I certainly can. So Nogai was the Mongol commander in the southeastern Europe from approximately 1267 until his death in 1300. He was a descendant of Chinggis Khan via his first son Jochi, and he fought with. He first shows up in the sources fighting alongside Berka Khan in the war against Hulagu over the pastures of Azerbaijan in the 1260s. He seems to have emerged early as a companion of Berka, likely converted to Islam at a similar time to him. He leads armies for Berka. Nogai's father, Totar, is actually one of the Jochid princes Hulagu kills sometime after the sack of Baghdad. So it's quite likely that Nogai was given command of an army as sort of a means to avenge his father, so to speak. After the end of that conflict, Nogai goes to the western end of the Golden Horde. So the Bruja area, sort of what's now modern Romania, western Ukraine, sort of along the Black Sea coast there in that sort of pasture land. So he ends up there about 1267, most likely, and he essentially spends the rest of the 13th century there and becomes the most dominant lord in that region. He interferes in politics in the Bulgarian Empire and the Kingdom of Hungary and Poland and the Rus principalities. He supplies troops that even go up into Lithuania, and he's most famous for his role in the Golden Horde. And it is that role in the Golden Horde that he plays in the 13th century that my thesis will be looking at. What ultimately ends up happening is Nogai, well, what he is most famous for, I guess, is image as a kingmaker, appointing and deposing Khans at will before he eventually bites off more than he can chew and is killed in a civil war against his final protege, Tokhta Khan. And is killed in about 1299, 1300. His sons hold on for a couple more years. One son, Cheka, I think it is, he actually sits on the throne of Bulgaria for like a year or two before his own demise. And it takes until about 1305, I think, for the last of the Nogaids to finally be ran off the scene. And he's sort of sometimes portrayed as sort of the first in the line of kingmakers or Khanmakers of the Golden Horde, and is compared to Mamai in the late 14th century, 1360 to 1380. He's the general defeated at the Battle of Kulakovo in 1380 against Dmitry Donskoy, and then killed by Tokhtamish the next year or the year after. And then, of course, Edigu is sort of the last Khanmaker appointed by Timur after his devastating invasions of the Golden Horde in the 1390s. So that's a very brief rundown on Nogai and his significance. So Jochid Prince, Kingmaker, influential for about a 40-year period, killed in civil war after fighting with the Jochid Khan.
I guess the bad symptoms of being a Genghis male, am I right?
It's bound to happen.
Yep. So, as part of the second question, what sort of political context in the Golden Horde gives rise to the power of Nogai Khan?
Well, now here's what's interesting about Nogai. So what my thesis is actually focusing on is essentially there is a contrast in the depiction in the popular scholar, or the modern scholarship, and the primary sources. In the modern scholarship, it is very, very popular to have Nogai essentially totally independent as soon as he shows up in the Western Steppe at the end of the 1260s. I do not believe that this is what is actually in the primary sources, at least so far as ones I've been able to read so far. So firstly, there has been mentioned before that Nogai grabbed this area in the Western Steppe and the aftermath after Berka's death in 1266, that Nogai went over and was sort of taking land for himself. This is not the case. It is explicitly mentioned by sources like Pakimera, a contemporary Byzantine author or historian, who says that Nogai was actually appointed here by Berka's successor Menka Temur, which might have even been confirmed by Kublai Khan himself. So Nogai is appointed to the Western Steppe, and it seems for the first 10 years or so, he is just completely subservient. He is carrying out the will of the Khan. What begins to change, though, is after the death of Menka Temur in 1280, maybe 1282. There's some discrepancy there. Nogai had been, by that point, he was the chief official and intermediary between the Golden Horde and Europe. And he was already meddling in affairs with the local kingdoms there, especially Bulgaria, but also the Byzantine Empire. He marries a daughter of the Byzantine Emperor, Michael VIII. So he's been building up sort of these local contacts for decades. But what happens with Menka Temur's death in 1280 is that the chief figure who had total oversight or control over Nogai is removed from the picture. And Menka Temur's successors aren't able to exert the same influence over Nogai. Now, I don't think Nogai was actively trying to become independent, but he was more concerned with his own local autonomy. And this is a local autonomy he continues to build up for the rest of his career. The one thing to consider is if this is sort of an intentional nature of the Jochid state, however. I'm sure you are aware of the debates around the Blue Horde and the White Horde sort of thing, the two halves of the Jochid Ulus. Mm-hmm. So for those listening unawares, it's unclear which is which in the sources, because the Rus sources and the Persian sources sort of differ on calling which side's the Blue Horde, which side's the White Horde. But essentially, there seems to have been two halves of the Golden Horde. One half ruled by the descendants of Batu, mm-hmm. the Golden Horde, and then another half ruled by the descendants of Jochi's oldest son, Orda, the Blue Horde or the White Horde. And if one's the White Horde, then we call the other half the Blue Horde, and it's kind of a mess. But it could be that we shouldn't be thinking of the Golden Horde as a centralized state where any sort of efforts at autonomy by any of the local governors is just steps to independence, but rather that is how it's designed. The scale of the Golden Horde is immense. It is impossible for the Khan and Sarai to actually be exerting full centralized power over the vastness of the steppe lands that the Horde entails. So where Nogai is set up, he is at that time, that is basically the periphery of the empire. The actual main concern of the Horde Khans is the steppe itself and the trade routes through the The Khan in Sarai isn't really concerned over what happens in Bulgaria, so Nogai's basically left free reign to there. So essentially, the short answer is Nogai starts to grow in power because he's basically out of the Khan's sight, more or less. Or at least not in an area where the Khan is very concerned what he gets up to, until he's so well entrenched that it is a concern.
That's actually a very interesting lead up into our next question. Because I think I first sort of really encountered this sort of like observation about like how power functioned in the Khanates as time went on when I first looked into Timor. And here's the question so far. So there seems to be a general trend of making the Khan a figurehead as the famous Toluid Han's age and die. At least this is what I've understood from what I've read. Do you think Nogai is a part of this trend?
I do not. Now that is, like we were saying before, his popular image is the Khanmaker. Well, so sort of the most famous example in this sort. So Merka Timur. So okay, maybe to simplify this. So Batu founds. We can consider him the fellow who sets up the Golden Horde after the invasion of Europe. Berka is often considered he's Batu's younger brother, and he's the one who goes to war with Hulagu. Sometimes he's considered the first Khan. Merka Timur, who is a son? I have it written down here somewhere. I never remember the exact genealogy. Anyways, he's a descendant of Batu, I think a grandson maybe. But he's really the first truly independent Golden Horde Khan from 1266 to 1280-82. After he dies, the throne goes to his brother Turdamunka. Now, the removal of Turdamunka in 1287, that's usually shown as this is Nogai going in there, removing the Khan. But this is not what is in the sources. And this is why you'll often see very contradictory statements on this. So I have this all written down. I can't remember which exact author says what. Like, these are modern authors I'm talking about. So, I do remember. So Roman Patrikayev says that Nogai was frustrated by Turdamunka's even minimal attempts to exert control over Nogai, so Nogai has him removed. Timothy May, in his work, in his 2018, The Mongol Empire, it's a broad coverage of like the Mongol Empire as a whole, and I actually very much recommend it if you want just like a singular source, like general coverage of like the entirety of the Mongol Empire and the four successor Khanates. It's a fantastic resource, and Timothy May is a great historian. Mm-hmm. But he says there that Nogai actually removed Turdamunka because he didn't want a puppet, and that Turdamunka was too weak a ruler for him, and he wanted more of a dynamic that he had with Merka Timur. Of course, these things are totally contradictory. But what we see in the sources, actually, is that, so this is mentioned by the Mamluk authors and the history of Rashid al-Din, which are by far the most detailed on this matter. In these sources, Turdamunka is not removed by Nogai. Nogai has no involvement at all. However, it is a group of Jochid princes who remove Nogai. This is Tolubuka, who goes in there and it's essentially a 4-year princely junta, and Tolubuka seems to rule in connection with these 4 other princes. So I do not believe at any stage in the 13th century that the Jochid Khan is ever really a figurehead. The closest I think we get to that is with Tokta and Nogai, after Nogai does in fact help Tokta take the throne from Tolubuka. Tokta Khan, so he's Khan from 1291 to 1304, maybe, I think. Anyways, the exact years don't matter, but that is the closest we get, and he's still not being overpowered by Nogai then. So I do not think Nogai is a part of this trend, because I don't think the Golden Horde ever really reaches that stage in the 13th century where the Khan is just a figurehead. So we do see that in the late 14th century with Mamai, and we're sort of the period of complete anarchy from the death of, after the death of Janabeg in 1344, I think, in the 1340s, late 1340s. So Janabeg dies. You basically have a 20-year period of total anarchy in the Golden Horde. Dozens of Khans go through the throne. In 1 year in Sarai, we have coins minted in the names of 6 Khans. So 6 Khans took the throne in 1 single year there, and they're being appointed and deposed all the time. And that's when the Black Death goes through the whole.
Could you start off your answer on, I believe it was the third question?
The third question, yeah. So, do I think Nogai is a part of the trend of making the Khans a figurehead in the 13th century? No, I do not. I do not believe at any point in the 13th century that the Golden Horde Khans got to that point of weakness. And I do not think Nogai actually exercised as much influence as that. In the primary sources, we see that, in fact, most of the major coup in the Golden Horde of the 13th century is actually carried out by Tolabuka and a group of Jogchen princes. This is described in the histories of the contemporaries Rashid al-Din and some of the Mamluk authors, al-Nuairi and Baybars al-Mansuri, as well as a couple others, but those are sort of the main originators of the Mamluk scholarship tradition regarding this. Nogai, he's only actually involved in one actual, according to these sources, which are the most detailed sources on the matter, Nogai is only involved in one overthrow of a Khan, and that is the overthrow of Tolabuka in 1291 alongside Tokta Khan. So Nogai is not acting alone in this, and he doesn't. He essentially returns to his own territory after this, and he's never actually the one making decisions in the Horde as a whole. I believe that this sort of image of the figurehead Khans, this is actually much more reflective of the period in the Golden Horde from about 1350 to 1380. The Horde's time of troubles, and it's an intense period of political anarchy. The Horde goes through dozens of Khans. That's when the Black Death hits. There's economic troubles from the disruption of the overland trade routes with the breakup of much of the Mongol Empire, especially the Ilkhanate and Chagatai Khanate. Then we see the Khans of the Golden Horde becoming basically puppets for various kingmakers. So I think this must have been sort of transpired to the 13th century, where, so of course that time of troubles, that's the heyday of Mamai. And as we mentioned earlier, there is a tendency to see Nogai as sort of the first round of these Khan makers, so Nogai, Mamai, Edagu. And because this happened to be the situation under Mamai, and people sort of assumed this was the situation under Nogai. But so no, I do not think Nogai is a part of this wider trend. So his main concern throughout the 13th century is his personal territory, his appanage, and again in that sort of Romania, Western Ukraine sort of region, Bulgaria, and he interferes outside of that when these are things that may be affecting his territory or to secure his position there. So he, at no point is he ever trying for actual power over the Golden Horde itself.
Oh, you certainly convinced me.
As I hope that's what I do in my thesis.
Yeah, yeah. I think the thing with like the whole like Han makers and the sort of decentralization that I sort of picked up on in the later periods of like the various Mongol Khanates, it kind of seems to be like something that it kind of really seems to gain its stride with figures like with Timur or I think Essen Han during the time of the Northern Yuan, but I think it's very fascinating that it kind of seems like Nogai kind of got this sort of, I would say, mischaracterization. Sort of just he wanted to be the guy running his own his own darn territory. And I guess the here's the next part of the question. The next question. While Nogai is the great grandson of Chinggis Khan, he never actually takes power as the true Khan of the Golden Horde. Why does he never do this?
Well, I think the most straightforward, there's probably a couple layers to it. Probably the most straightforward answer. So while he is a descendant of Chinggis Khan and is a descendant of Jochi, and of course, to rule the Golden Horde, you have to be a descendant of Jochi, Nogai is descended through like Jochi's seventh son. So in the Golden Horde, while it is true in theory that the throne in all of the Khanites is open to any member of the Chinggisid family, what always ends up happening in practice is that it becomes essentially restricted to a main part of that lineage. So usually whichever son or grandson of Chinggis actually had a role in establishing that Khanate. So in the Golden Horde, this is the line of Batu, and it will remain in the hands of descendants of Batu up until the deaths of Uzbek Khan's sons in the 1340s and 50s. After that, the line of Batu basically goes extinct. Nogai is not a descendant of Batu. He is like well like past that. By the time he comes of age, there's a lot of little Jochids running around. By that point, he doesn't have the he's not a descendant of Batu. It seems that he is also not a descendant of an actual wife. So let me rephrase that. So Nogai's father, Totar, seems to have had Nogai with a concubine rather than an actual wife, which also would have excluded him from lineage, made his claim weaker. And sort of the third factor, in the 1260s during the war against Hulagu, Nogai suffers a grievous wound to his face. He loses an eye, apparently to a blow from a spear. And if you've taken a spear to the face and it's caused you to lose an eye, you've probably lost a bigger chunk of your face than just an eye. And there seems to, I don't think it's ever really a written rule, but there's this sense that if you are going to be the monarch, you have to be physically perfect. And I don't mean like, tall and ripped with a six-pack and, but rather in the sense that you have to like physically have all of your bits still attached. So having a large chunk of your face missing, that if it comes to a hurutai where you are going to be voted for against the other candidates, that's probably going to exclude you as much as anything. So probably all of these things together is, I think, what leads to Nogai never actually putting his name in for the throne, if he even could.
So I think that's very interesting, because like the thing I always thought was like when it came to like the cruelty is like you get to choose you get to have the ruler chosen based not only on the candidate's lineage, but maybe a bit of their like actual merit as a possible ruler. Mm-hmm. And Now it seems to some extent looks are also a bit of a factor.
Well, it's not necessarily that who's the most attractive. It's just, I think, the sense that a ruler has to have, he can't be missing chunks of himself. There's a sense he should be symmetrical, might be the best word for it. Not necessarily, like, it probably doesn't hurt to be physically quite beautiful. Like, we know by the time Hublai becomes Khan, he's already overweight and an alcoholic. But in that case, he's not missing any body parts, and also he has a huge amount of resources and a big army backing him up. So you can play with that. And at no point does Nogai actually have the wealth or military strength to make a claim to replace the missing eye, essentially, in terms of this. Now, one thing that does seem to have happened, so in the last years of the 1290s, as his conflict with Tokta escalates, it seems Nogai may have actually declared himself Khan, not of the Golden Horde, but just made himself a Khan, because he begins to mint coins in his own name. But these are only found in his territory, so it seems, I do not think he was ever making himself Khan of the Golden Horde, but like Khan of the Ulus of Nogai. Sort of like with Haidu Khan in his famous war with Hublai. Haidu was never trying to become Grand Khan. Despite the fact sometimes, I think in that Marco Polo Netflix series, I think he's like fighting against Kublai for the place of the Grand Khan. Kaidu never actually makes a claim to this. He's only ever making a claim to be Khan of the Ulus of Urgadai. And I think this is sort of similar with Nogai. Nogai knows he cannot be the legitimate Khan of the Golden Horde because of what we just discussed a couple minutes ago. But he can just make himself Khan of his own Ulus, which, as a Chinggisid, is his right. He has a right to be a Khan, just not of the Golden Horde because of the established rules there. So, and I should say this, the evidence of that is not universally described to. The idea is that if you are, the ability to mint coins in your own name is a right reserved for the monarch. That is a common understanding. I am not sure if that is actually always specifically the case, though. And just minting coins is not necessarily an indication of the intention. Like, there should be more. That's sort of the thoughts on the matter. So because of all of that, to get back to the main question, Nogai cannot become Khan of the Golden Horde, and never seems to have made an effort to, even if there were sort of loopholes for that. So
it's very interesting. I'm used to kind of finding like the line of succession kind of mostly limited to like the first wife. At least that's what I understood from leading the line from at least Chinggis to Ogadai. But anyways, I guess I should say moving on. So what is like the coolest / funniest little factoid that you ever found about Nogai Khan? Like, think of the time you told me about like Chinggis Khan being scared of dogs.
So probably my favorite is so as you mentioned before, Nogai marries a daughter of the Byzantine Emperor, Michael VIII. He's the fellow who retakes Constantinople in 1261. Sort of a bad timing to do that because he ends up basically sandwiched between the Ilkhanate and Nogai in the Balkans. In the very late 1260s, Nogai is sending raiding parties into Thrace, and basically approaching Constantinople itself. And Michael VIII sends one of his illegitimate daughters to be married off to Nogai. So Michael becomes the father-in-law to Nogai. This is in 1270, I believe, that the marriage occurred. 1273, actually, I'm pretty sure. And for the record, Michael also sends a daughter to marry Hulagu. Hulagu dies first, and she marries Abaka, Ilkhan. So he's playing both sides here. But anyways, so Nogai is the son-in-law of the Byzantine emperor. He's given a title Archon, means like a provincial ruler. So what ends up, he will he will assist his father-in-law several times until Michael's death in 1282. So when there's rebellions, especially by a fellow in Thessaly, John of Thessaly, I think his name was, Nogai sends a bunch of his soldiers to go in there and assist Michael in campaigns with him. But of course, as a good Roman emperor, you have to be sending gifts to the barbarians. So Michael, he's often sending gifts to Nogai, and one of the anecdotes recorded in the primary sources, this is in Pachymeres, I believe. So he sends to Nogai a lovely diadem, a nice silver-studded diadem, and some sort of jewel-encrusted shirt. I don't remember the specific object, but it's something like that. Some pretty dainty things like that. Lots of jewelry. And so the envoy is presented to Nogai, and Nogai looks at it, puts the diadem on his head, puts on the shirt, and goes, "Will these protect me from thunderstorms? Will these prevent me from losing stamina in battle? No? Then what's the point in wearing these?" So then he rips them off and throws them on the ground and stomps on them and tears them to pieces. But he just could not, and goes back to just wearing his regular del, sort of traditional Mongolian clothing. And I think that's always my favorite. That sort of tells you what kind of the princess from Constantinople. She's probably not living in a palace with Nogai. I guess say because of that, I kind of have an image in my head that Nogai is one of those fellows who he's a proud nomad. He's not. All the business of the day is being conducted in a ger, or in a felt tent yurt. He's not just living in buildings nonsense. So
that's very fascinating. It's kind of this sort of like kind of this sort of like he's really making a show of like, in the sense of like he's considered an archon of the Byzantine Empire. But yet he's basically showing that he's really in charge here, and sometimes he's going to make a mockery out of the heirs of Rome, and it's.
I don't think he had much respect for the Byzantines, and I mean, why would you? You're a descendant of Chinggis Khan. Heaven has ordained the whole of the world to belong to you and your family. What? The Byzantine Empire is essentially Constantinople and a little bit of Greece. You show them respect. They sent you a bunch of jewelry. You're a nomad. Why would you care about a diadem or whatever it was? So,
yeah. That's very fascinating. But anyways, so moving on. So what sort of sources on Nogai Khan do you have access to in Vienna, and what primary sources are you basing your thesis on?
Mm-hmm. So it's not so much the primary sources, or rather, when I came, so for those of you listening, I used to live in Canada. Now I live in Vienna for purposes of my master's thesis. I haven't gotten new primary sources that I would not have been able to access back in Canada because they're actually all online. What is useful is actually the contacts and the professors, my specific supervisors at the university here, as well as people I've met through here, and other people. Of course, being in Europe, it's a lot easier to now contact and discuss with other European scholars focusing on the Golden Horde or 13th century southeastern Europe sort of things. I mean, just a simple fact that I'm in the same time zone as everyone here instead of 9 hours behind is a lot more convenient. I was able to do a conference over Zoom, of course, but and I discussed a little bit of this stuff with some people there who presented at the conference and made some good contacts there. So for my purposes, that is why Vienna is more useful to me. I'm not looking at parchments actually maintained in any museum or archives or anything here. But as for the actual primary sources I'm working on, it's quite a number. The most detailed sources on Nogai are actually coming from the Ilkhanate. Of these, of course, the dominant is the Universal History of Rashid al-Din Hamadani. He was the vizier of the Ilkhanate at the start of the 1300s. A very intelligent man, recorded just a mammoth amount of information there. And I'm also using sources from the Mamluk Sultanate, Rukin al-Din Baybars, or also called Baybars al-Mansuri and al-Nuwairi, and then some supporting stuff from some later Mamluk authors. Because of that alliance between the Mamluks and the Golden Horde, these fellows had actually, or they had access to correspondence between the Mamluk Sultan and the Jurchid Khan. As well, Nogai also sent letters to the Mamluk Sultans, especially Baybars, and it seems that this actual correspondence was used as the sources by these Mamluk authors. So these are sort of the main evidence against, or for the reinterpretation of Nogai. I'm also using information from the Rus sources, so the Chronicle of Novgorod, the Hypatian Galician Chronicle, the Laurentian Codex. These sources aren't actually, the Rus sources are interesting because how little they actually provide for information on the Golden Horde. If you're lucky, they'll say something like, in 1291, there was tumult among the Tartars. Tsars Tokhta and Tsars Nogai killed Tsars Telobuka and Tsars Algui or something like that. But the Hypatian Volhynian Chronicle, my apologies, the Galician Volhynian Chronicle actually provides a lot of information on Nogai's interactions with Galicia and his invasion of Hungary and Poland in the 1280s. Also, another important source of information here is Byzantine sources. Of these, Georgios Pachymeres, writing in the early 1300s, I forget the exact year on him, is the most relevant. He's the one who gave us that fun little anecdote of Nogai destroying the Byzantine jewelry. And there's a little bit of supporting, or these Byzantine sources, of course, being Romans, they are only concerned about what is happening as it affects the Roman Empire, such as it was. So they're not actually all that great for stuff within the Horde, but they do provide a lot of interesting information on Nogai's interaction with the Byzantine Empire, but also how they perceived him and the terminology they use to refer to him and how they dealt with him. Obviously, if they felt he was more powerful individual, more influential, they're going to treat him more generously. There's some supporting information from correspondence between Western Europeans and merchants in Crimea, for example, and sort of rumors of. There's a great article by Alexander Uzlak on sort of echoes. The article is called "Echoes of the Conflict Between Tokhta and Nogai in Western European Sources," or something like that, and it mentions or it provides the brief mentions of the conflict when it does show up in Western European sources. So there are very brief mentions, but that the fact that there are mentions is interesting and indicative of the influence Nogai must have had at the end of his life in order to be mentioned at all in France, for example. And so the final source of interest for the purposes of this research paper is Marco Polo. So Marco Polo's travels, in Marco Polo's travels, the actual final, very final chapters are actually dedicated to Nogai and sort of the Golden Horde. The book actually ends with the conflict between Nogai and Tokta. It was initially written in 1300, so Marco Polo was held in a prison by the Genoese and was dictating this to his cellmate Rustichello. And it seemed they were actually dictating this before news of the final outcome of the war between Tokta and Nogai came to them, because in most editions, because there's a lot of manuscript editions, Marco Polo's work actually ends with an abortive declaration of Nogai's victory over Tokta, though in fact he dies a couple months after that. But Marco Polo's version is very interesting for my purposes, because none of these other sources I've been mentioning, none of them are describing Nogai in this Kingmaker image, or in this Khanmaker image, sorry. He is deposing kings in Bulgaria, and he is interfering in Hungary and the Rus principalities. But in this Islamic tradition, so Rashid al-Din, the Mamluk authors, Nogai is only involved in the overthrow of Tolabuka in 1291 alongside Tokta Khan. He plays no role in any of the transitions, or that is the transitions between Khans prior to 1291. Marco Polo's account, Nogai does play a role in all of these transitions. And now, it should be stated, Marco Polo's account also confuses all of the names and gets the chronology mixed up, and Totamanka and Tolabuka become switched around in the order of the Khans, and it's messy. But it's interesting that here is the edition, or here is the, I guess, closest source to, or contemporary source, which is actually depicting this. So what I suspect might have happened is that easier access to Marco Polo as opposed to these Islamic sources, because Marco Polo's work was spread all over Europe, over the 14th century. It's an ease of accessibility to the European historians that is not available until quite recently of these other sources. But so far what I found is that the early, and by early I mean 19th century, early 20th century modern historians are actually accurately following this two traditions. That is, the early modern historians are describing what is happening as per what is described in the Islamic sources. Often there's a lot of exaggeration and hyperbole, but they are not relying solely on Marco Polo's account. However, the Khanmaker image is showing up in the more recent literature, so at some point that's entered in, and I'm still trying to find the origins of that. So that's what's currently going on with my the literary side of my thesis.
That's very fascinating. Wow. Yep. So, anyways, moving on. So, what do you think is Nogai Khan's leadership style, if you will?
Well, see, that's kind of a tough one, because we have a lot of sources talking about Nogai and his interactions with others, like his foreign policy, essentially. There isn't a lot of information on what he's actually doing within his kingdom and how his what his rule actually looks like. Alexander Uzelac, he's a Serbian historian, great historian, and he's done some interesting stuff on that. Essentially, what seems to have happened is there is an influx of nomadic peoples, Alans, Kipchaks, and a small group of Mongols into the region with Nogai's arrival into that. Again, that lower end of the Danube, Romania, Dobruja sort of area. We do have mentions of, for instance, Nogai lowering the taxes in his area to lower than that of what is being paid in tax in the rest of the Golden Horde, like vis-a-vis the Rus principalities. And he's doing this in order to get peasants and people to come into his kingdom. And sort of this sense of repopulating, sort of wanting to bring people in. And like you said, he is minting coins in there. He establishes a capital. And by capital, it's kind of, we shouldn't picture like he's building his own version of Karakorum, but rather this is his administrative center where the bureaucracy that exists in his kingdom, such as it is, if we can call it a kingdom, is set up there. The Mongols call the city Zakshi. I don't remember I think it's also called Izatsia, but I'm not quite sure on the name because I've only ever read it in the Mongol rendition. So essentially we don't have a lot of information on what kind of administrative style or policies that Nogai put through in his kingdom. However, most of what we do know about his actions are his military actions. And what is sort of interesting in this is that almost every single campaign Nogai leads himself is a defeat. He very rarely does he actually win battles. I'm not sure the exact reason for this. He's often fighting against much larger odds. So when he does have victories, they're often against foes where he actually outnumbers them. I think he actually just wasn't all that good a commander, but essentially his greatest strength is that he's just an incredibly wily politician. And he's able to sort of spot an opportunity and sort of weasel his way into that and interfere. And he can show up, he can move very quickly. And he shows up with a large group of horsemen, or horse archers rather. And this is what's making him the key player in events in the Balkans and allowing him to there interfere, replace monarchs. There's an uprising in Bulgaria in the late 1270s, I want to say, Ivailo, the uprising of Ivailo. And Nogai ends up sort of playing the decisive role in the final outcome of that, but basically only when he has been asked to by the Byzantine emperor. So he's not always proactive in what he is doing here. So essentially what I picture with Nogai is a guy who likes to sit back and see where the cards are falling and then make his play, see how he can make the best out of that. And I'll explain that a bit more with your next question on the invasion of Hungary and Poland there.
All right. Oh, that's... So, yep. So, probably one of Nogai's most famous acts was the second invasion of Hungary. What led into this invasion, and how successful was it?
So, what ends up happening, there's a lot of stuff that happens in Hungary after the 1242 invasion, and we won't get into quite all of that today because it's a long time to explain. But the very short answer as to a bit of context: Mongols withdraw 1242. King Bela IV returns to Hungary. He starts rebuilding the kingdom. There's new castle defenses in the western half of the kingdom. He's making local marriage alliances. And most important for this is he invites the Cumans back into Hungary and marries his son, Stephen, to a Cuman princess as sort of a marriage alliance. And these Cumans are set up in sort of the center of the Hungarian plain between the Danube and the Tisza rivers. This is, so you probably notice, Janos, the modern part of Hungary called Cumania. Kiskunság, I think. The Nogai Khan. Yeah. So this is when this shows up, because the area that is called that today, that was the area that Bela gave to the Cumans in the 1250s. Because essentially this region was totally depopulated by the Mongol invasion in the 1240s. So, and as that was grassland, pasture, it was a good area for nomads. But the fact that there were no peasants there anymore, there are no Hungarians there anymore, meant you wouldn't have the same issue you had when the first invasion, when the Cuman forces were having this friction with the nomads because animals were ranging over the fields and stuff like that. So the Cumans are set up as sort of this first line of defense in Hungary proper. So skipping over most of the sordid Hungarian history, because there's civil wars and factionalism over Hungary up until, or basically throughout the 13th century. When is there not? There's fighting in there, and the Cumans are sort of on both sides of a conflict between King Bela and his son Stephen. Bela dies in 1270, I think. His son Stephen reigns for about 2 or 5 years before he dies. And he is succeeded by his very young son, Ladislaus, or Laszlo. Now, Laszlo was a son of King Stephen and his Cuman wife. Mm-hmm. And he grew up, he seems he was grown up, sort of raised in the Cuman culture, or grew up with an affinity to it, possibly because of how he was treated by the Hungarian barons. At the time he became king, he was actually held captive by other Hungarian nobility. So he is sort of remembered as Laszlo the Cuman, or Ladislaus the Cuman, and he preferred the company of Cumans to the Hungarians. He lived in Cuman camps, dressed like a Cuman, took Cuman mistresses, and avoided his legal wife, such as she would have been called by the other Christians, and showers favors on them and all this and that. However, he's not showering quite enough favors on them, and there's a lot of pressure on there's a lot of pressure on Ladislaus to distance himself from the Cumans, and there's laws or papal officials coming in demanding that essentially the Cumans stop nomadizing and adopt Christianity and do all these things, and you have all these pressures building together, and this leads to a revolt of the Cumans in 1280, which is only crushed in 1282 at a battle on Lake Hod, which sees a large exodus of Cumans from Hungary, though not all of them flee. And where do these Cumans go? Why, to our one-eyed friend in southeastern Europe, Nogai Khan. So it seems the Nogai, he receives all these well-armed horse archers with open arms, and essentially what he hears is that the main line of Hungary's defense has just left the kingdom. And this looks like a great chance to take advantage of Hungarian weakness. So they spend some time building an army, and in coordination with Toloboka, a rising Jochid prince, they lead an attack onto Hungary in 1285.
Call from city.
and it does not go well. There is a couple reasons for this. For starters, Tolobuka and Nogai were not the equals to Subadai and Batu. I think a large part of it is it seems they failed to really coordinate their actions and were not able to achieve any sort of the strategic successes that had been enjoyed in the 1240s attack. Hungary was more fortified, not so much in the Hungarian plain, but it seems that there was, in the western half of the kingdom, particularly, and to a lesser extent in the eastern half, castle designs had been improved. An argument made by my friend and actually a fellow Canadian, Stephen Powell, is that essentially the Hungarians saw that the only thing standing after the 1240s invasion were stone castles and buildings, so that there may have been an increase in their construction or in the last half of the 13th century. It seems that Nogai and Tolobuka had anticipated that there would not be any sort of coordinated Hungarian defense. So it looks like they split their forces into small groups, just like, yeah, go nuts, guys, just raid and attack and do whatever. And this brings us to the next level of the Hungarian defensive strategy, which was sort of a building of local defensive forces. So arming and training, I guess, local troops to rise up in times of need. And this is what happens, especially in the northeast, so through modern Slovakia. Świsz County, Jaros County, I believe. My friend Michal Holschlag has done a lot of work on this, and you can read his academia.edu profile. He has some articles uploaded there on the finds he has found. That he's an archaeologist focusing on this sort of material. Essentially, the Mongols operating in these small parties all of a sudden find themselves fighting stiff resistance wherever they go. There's a nice big narrative chronicle discussing this invasion like there is for the 1240s attack. So it's very tentatively reconstructed based off of charter evidence and archaeology and sort of scant mentions from outside sources. It's not a total collapse of the Mongol forces here by any means. It seems from the charter evidence that King Ladislaus never even got close to the Mongols. He essentially stayed on the far edge of the western half of the kingdom, as far from them as he could. It does not seem the royal army was ever actually raised to combat the Mongols. There's no big battle wherein the Mongols are overcome or anything like that. In fact, the Mongols are actually described driving a large force of slaves and captives and captured animals out of the kingdom. And what happens is they get ambushed in now Transylvania and the Carpathians. Nogai loses most of his captives, but he forces his way through fine. Tolobuka, on the other hand, he ends up basically getting lost in the mountains for days, trapped by inclement weather, and seems to lose a huge portion of his force to exposure, mountain ambushes, rains and snows and starvation and all of these things. And this is perhaps the one detail of the second invasion which is unanimous in all of the source traditions, so including the Rus principalities, the Mamluk authors. I don't know if the charter evidence specifies this as well, but Tolobuka loses many, many men in the mountains, and he essentially blames Nogai for this. He feels that Nogai abandoned him, left him to die, something like that, especially since Nogai's troops seem to have got out, maybe not unscathed, but in much, much better shape than Tolobuka.
There we are, back again. So, yep.
Yeah. Sorry, where about do you think we were? Sorry.
I think you were describing the. I think you were right at describing, I believe, the snowstorm.
Yes. Okay. So apologies if I repeat myself here, but the one thing that is consistent among basically all the source traditions, Rus principalities, Mamluk sources, is that there is a horrific, or when Tolobuka's army is attempting to leave the Carpathians, they are trapped by snowstorms, rainstorms. They're trapped in the mountain range. They basically lose their route. There's local ambushes, and his force is just decimated. He loses hundreds and hundreds of men and animals, and essentially blames Nogai for it in some manner, because Nogai's force, while probably not totally unscathed, gets out in much better shape. Now, they do go on to attack Poland in 1288. Together, that is, Nogai and Tolobuka do this attack. It is not an outright defeat by any means, but it's inconclusive. And it seems Tolobuka gets frustrated when they go to attack Warsaw, I believe, and he finds Nogai is already there, for instance. And Tolobuka's feeling that Nogai is playing with him almost, that he is sort of anticipating his moves and just trying to piss him off and waste his time. And Tolobuka, he doesn't want to play with Nogai, essentially, and he does the 13th century equivalent of getting mad, and you take the ball and you just leave the court. he just leaves the campaign. And it should be stated too, if it wasn't clear from the description there, is that when they are doing these operations, Nogai and Tolobuka are not moving in one army. They are two separate forces. So that is why they're not actually linking up here. They're staying in some sort of contact by riders, but they're never able to combine their forces. And it seems, to an extent, Tolobuka was a bit of a hothead. Now, Tolobuka becomes Khan, actually, around this time. He was probably became Khan after the attack on Hungary, and then was already Khan by the time of the attack on Poland. So he could feel a little haughty there, but you're the Khan. You shouldn't have to be getting repulse out of Poland, of all places. So it's not a coincidence that it seems Tolobuka basically starts to plot against Nogai after this, and that helps encourage Nogai and Tokta to sort of work together and overthrow Tolobuka in 1291. And from the Mongol perspective, that's probably the greatest consequence of the Hungarian attack. And that is the last major Mongol attack on Hungary. There will be more small raids and stuff, but none of them. What was interesting, especially after the 1285 attack, it becomes very difficult to actually find mentions of the sort of these attacks and sources. Like there'll be a charter saying something like, "Oh, so and so was awarded this castle for his defense or his role in repulsing the Mongol attack in 1306," something like that. So there's no substantive Mongol efforts against Hungary or Poland again after the 1280s. It seems the efforts to operate there were just getting too difficult. Local forces seem to have found effective defensive measures against Mongol attacks, though these aren't exactly clear what these all were. As again, due to the nature of the sources, we don't have nice specific descriptions providing us this information. So, but it seems local defensive ability mattered more than trying to bring a full army against the Mongols, because that is what we see in both of these occasions. Is the Mongols are frustrated by local defenses, stiff sieges. It does not seem they brought any siege equipment with them, like no catapult crews or anything. So they lacked the ability to force the major cities of Poland, for example, and they were forced to withdraw there.
That's very fascinating. I think the thing that I can see from this whole from these invasions is like the Hungarians and the Poles seem to have learned from their terrible experiences at like Liegnitz and Mohi,
Mm-hmm.
and the Mongols in this sort of time period they didn't completely weaken per se, but they certainly got a little bit like decentralized and disconnected, and this really allowed for the Hungarians and the Poles to really almost face the Mongol armies with as two major Mongol armies as sort of individual armies rather than hoping that they would coordinate and attack sensibly.
Like I said there, that what Batu and Subadai did, as well as the rest of the Mongol forces in the 1240s attack, like that is incredibly effective when that's done well, but it is so difficult to do that properly. It requires so much training and discipline and logistical ability to be having all of these many armies operating together effectively, sometimes hundreds of kilometers apart. That's incredibly difficult to do, and you need troops that have been training for that their entire lives. By the 1280s attack, at least in the Golden Horde, it's been 20 years since an attack of any scale anywheres. The war with the Ilkhanites cools down. There's a very devastating attack on Poland in the early 1260s. And the Polish sources actually describe it as more destructive than the 1241 attack. But since then, there just has not been an opportunity for the forces to receive the same training that Batus and Subadais enjoyed in 1241. And I think that it's not that they are not tactically less dangerous, it's that strategically they don't have the same edge. They cannot maximize their strength. That sounds good.
So with the end of the second invasion, I guess we'll move on to question 9. Nogai collaborated with multiple Khans as the Ulus Jochi's de facto ruler. Probably the most notable being Talabuga, I believe.
Yeah, that's Tolabuka, who we've been talking about in the second invasion there.
What do you think influenced his choices of like who to work with?
So, as we mentioned a while ago now, there was some discrepancy in modern historians' interpretations if Nogai wanted a Khan to be a puppet or not, or if he actually wanted a guy to have some independence kind of thing. And as I've been saying, I don't really follow that argument. I do not really support that purpose of view. I think he was mostly uninvolved with this. I think the reason of the partnership with Tolabuka, I think this was essentially, so Nogai was going to be involved either way, as he is the regional commander there. He's the one whose appanage actually borders Hungary, so it makes most sense to have his involvement. He may have even been the instigator of the idea. Tolabuka was by then an up-and-coming Jochid Khan, up-and-coming Jochid prince. I believe he had designs on the throne and was trying to basically build his reputation as a military commander. We mentioned before at the Hurultai, you have to have all of your features and have sort of resources and military ability and the proper descent to make your claim for the throne. There is not evidence, as far as I have seen, that Tolabuka was actually involved in military operations prior to this. The currently reigning Jochid Khan, Terdamanka, he is described in the sources as, so he becomes Khan after Menkatemer's death, and he becomes more interested in religion and obsessed with Sufis and things like that rather than ruling. So Tolabuka wants to get some military experience, make a bit of a name for himself, and in conjunction with Nogai, he leads these attacks. I do not think this was Nogai necessarily choosing him, though he may have been aware of Tolobucha. And of course, for the attack on Poland, I think Tolobucha was already Khan. He likely became Khan in the intervening years. So, yeah, the Khan wants to be involved. He wants to build this reputation for himself. And again, this is again tying back to my argument that Nogai is not the decisive power broker in the Golden Horde in the 13th century. He is not simply picking someone out of a lineup and going, I like your qualities, we'll use you. This is what circumstances are presenting to him. So when this is the Jochid prince who has the most interest in attacking Hungary, and we'll fight with him. Now, as we've been describing here, Tolobucha and Nogai have a falling out because of these European campaigns. And Tolobucha seems to be scheming against Nogai. But he's also scheming against other Jochid princes, namely his nephew, Tokta, who is seen, I forget if there's a specific reason mentioned in the sources or not, but he's basically seen as a threat of some kind to Tolobucha, a dissenter to Tolobucha and the princely junta. Probably another person who wanted to be in line for the throne, essentially. So Tolobucha, he makes the moves against Tokta first. And Tokta, in some of the sources, Tokta goes to Nogai for assistance against Tolobucha, or Nogai goes to Tokta to coordinate against Tolobucha. But again here, this is not Nogai saying, I really want to put Tokta on the throne. This is it's an alliance of necessity. Enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of matter. Not that they were enemies sort of thing, but rather useful allies for the moment and the pressures that were required. So I believe those are again, when you asked before on what I thought about Nogai's leadership style, he's the kind of guy who he watches things where they're falling into place and then tries to make his best play off of that. And sometimes he makes better choices than others. So in 1291, they do overthrow Tolobucha. It's sort of a fun little anecdote. So Nogai sends word to Tolobucha's mother saying that he wants to make peace because he's an old man and he's fallen sick. He's going to die soon, and he wants to make amends for the good of the Jochidus. So what Nogai does, he says, okay, we'll meet on whatever site on this day. And they meet there. And he says, okay, come along, just you guys, because it's just going to be me and my gear. So Tolobucha and the other four princes who are making up the junta here, they come into Nogai's tent, and Nogai's lying there. And so what Nogai had done is he'd swallowed blood clots before they came in. And so as they're walking in, he's coughing up blood and looking all sick, and because he's old by that point. He's in his 60s, and he's saying, "Oh, you young men, put aside the frailties of youth and the greed and the hunger and everything, and value what you have. And I just want to make amends." And while he's doing this, and it seems the princes, they're totally convinced by this. So while this is happening, a signal's been sent to Tokta and his men who are upstream or wherever, and now they show up with a whole bunch of armed men and kill these captured Jochid princes. And that's how Tolobucha is overthrown. And I think initially Nogai just wants to return to his place, but he starts grabbing more territory, he's gradually extending, in this period, extending his influence easterly. towards Crimea, towards the Rus principalities, and now he's butting up with the Joshid Khan. He starts making demands of Tokhta. I think this is the point where he starts to think, all right, now I'm the big dog. I can demand what I want of the Khan. And he oversteps. He asks, and it might have just been a test at some point. Rashid al-Din says that Nogai basically asks Tokhta to kill his own father-in-law, something like that. Or hand over his father-in-law to Nogai because the father-in-law had wronged Nogai in some manner. Tokhta says no. Tensions rise, and it ends up breaking out into war around 1296 or so. And so that's around the time when it seems Nogai begins to mint coins his own name. Hence the thought that Nogai was declaring himself Khan in his own territories and saying, you know what, I don't need the pretense of being vassal to the Khan in Sarai. I'll just be my own Khan. Nogai, he invades Crimea. One of his grandchildren are actually killed in Crimea. He defeats Tokhta once in battle. Tokhta manages to regroup. There's a rebellion in Nogai's newly taken territory. He's distracted by that. Tokhta makes peace with the Ilkhan. So because of that, he brings up all of the forces usually left at the border along the Caucasus to guard against the Ilkhanite. So he comes up with like an overwhelming force and just absolutely annihilates Nogai. Nogai's very final ploy is that the two armies line up along a river, and Nogai, he sends word to Tokhta. He says, "Oh, I'm an old man. I don't want to fight anymore. It was just my sons instigating it. I didn't want to fight. Please, let's just meet and make peace." And at the same time, Nogai's sons are going upstream with an army to try and flank Tokhta's troops. Tokhta knows the ploy. He doesn't fall for this, and he basically just attacks Nogai's forces. It's a complete rout. Nogai's forces just disintegrate. Nogai is captured by Russian horsemen while he's fleeing. He's injured, and his Rus captors go to capture him, and he says, okay, take me to Tokhta, for he is the Khan. He'll know what to do with me. But he dies of his injuries on the way. And I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, and I might not be, but that the Rus horsemen who captured him and ended up killing Nogai then are executed, because they did not have the right to kill a Chinggisid prince, even if it was Nogai.
Ah, makes sense.
So, and that's the end of the reign of Nogai Khan.
Wow. That's quite the end to a very engaging life, if you will. And I'll start wrapping up here with our last question. What sort of connections did Nogai have with the Nogai Horde?
So, this is another one of those areas where the historians have completely different views on this. So the Nogai Horde does not appear in the sources until the 15th century, after the dissolution of the Golden Horde, after Timur's invasion. And they appear sort of in the eastern Volga steppe, sort of, think, northwestern coastline of the Caspian Sea. The ruling tribe here of the Nogai Horde are the Mangits. I forget exactly how it's pronounced, which is the Turkified Mongol tribe, of course, with Chinggisid stock princes. Now, some historians, because of the name, Nogai Horde, Nogai Khan, decided, okay, Nogai is related to the Nogai Horde, so when Nogai set up in they will say that when Nogai set up in the Western Steppe, so again, lower Danube area, that Nogai came with a core of Manjit tribesmen. This is not mentioned in any of the primary sources. There is no explicit connection made between Nogai and the Manjits. There is no indication that his family land was in the northern Caspian steppe lands. Might have been, but this is not something described in the sources in any manner. There is no 13th or 14th century source which seems to make this connection at all between them. In fact, it seems just to be a matter of they have the same name. And so obviously, okay, well, Nogai Horde, same name, convincing, right? It's and that's not an unusual thing for a tribal confederation to take a name after a famous founder. But Nogai's name is not unique to him. So Nogai, for those unawares, is the Mongolian word for dog. Speculated he was probably born in the year of the dog, in the 12-year animal cycle, and so probably like 1237, 1238, something like that. And that was a very standard thing for Mongolian families. You'd name your children something indirect, like dog or nobody, or the first thing you saw. The idea being that you don't give it just like a human name, because then that will attract possibly evil spirits that would then attack the child and bring sickness and bad luck on it. So you name it's after an animal or something, because then the spirits are tricked and they don't know it's a person. So because of that, Nogai is not a unique name, not a unique appellation. So it's entirely possible that the Nogai Horde they just took it's the horde of the dog. It's not. It does not have to necessarily be tied to Nogai Khan in order for them to use the name. There is also argument, though, that it is a completely unrelated linguistic connection, and that it came from basically the regional Turk dialect there. What did it mean? I can't remember what the suggested meaning was, but something to do with sea, because they're right by the Caspian there. I'm drawing a blank on that one. Yeah, sorry. But anyways, essentially it's completely unrelated linguistic origin that also just happened to end up becoming Nogai. I have been told, or no, I have seen rather, from modern people who consider themselves Nogais, that Nogai Khan has sort of been adopted as like a, ancient hero of the lineage. But the thing about that I have to wonder is if this is one of those cases where these are modern people seeing this, like modern Nogais, that is, seeing this and sort of retroactively putting Nogai as his ancient forefounder, rather than an actual tradition which survived. And of course, making new traditions is hardly unusual. Timur is probably the most famous example of that. Really stressing that he had shared ancestry with Genghis Khan. On his tomb, one of his grandsons, probably Shah Rukh, built him a new tomb, and in it, now Timur was actually just a descendant of Genghis Khan himself, and also a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad.
All right, because he's the sword of Islam.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that most of his kill count is Muslim.
I think, if I'm remembering correctly, it was like they specified he was descendant of Ali, the prophets.
Oh, I see where they're going.
So it's just like you can make stuff up, right? You can just, if you want to give your ancestor or your people a new ancestor, there's nothing really stopping you from doing. You can do it at any time. The difference here is, in the case of Nogai Khan and the Nogai Horde, that there is not surviving medieval materials which support any sort of connection. And again, like even if you look on a map, Nogai Horde, northern coast of the Caspian Sea. Nogai Khan spent all of his life, or most of his career, from 1267 to his death in 1300, in the western end of the steppe, around Romania, Lower Danube, Bulgaria, like that kind of region. That's a long gap in between there, and there's no indication Nogai ever held power in that region, that he was likely only a relatively minor figure up until his appointment in the western steppe. There's no indication he had family over in that region, and even if he did, say that region was his father's territory. But why would then the son, who never seems to have held power there, especially since he was born from a concubine, there's no sense that they would then be adopting his name. And I suppose you could say, but there was family there, and they heard how powerful Nogai was in the West and wanted to honor him. But again, Nogai was only powerful in the West. He never made an attempt to be the prime figure in the Golden Horde itself and exert control over all of its vast territory. That would be a huge leap in power for him. And so from that point of view, for them, why would they care about, he's an influential figure in the western end of the steppe, but he doesn't actually have any role east of even the Don River or the Dnieper. I think at his height, his influence extended to the Dnieper, but just for a couple years in the 12... hang on, I got my map here. As far as the Dnieper and Crimea. So I do not think there is a connection between the names. It's just one of those coincidences of history. Now, we will sometimes see, so the Nogai Horde has its own flag. It's like a blue background with like a green dog on it, or a green wolf or something. And sometimes people will use that as a symbol for Nogai Khan. But he did have his own Tamga. We have coins that show what symbol he used to represent himself. And it wasn't that yet. So, to me, the evidence is too great against him being related in any fashion to the Nogai Horde. There's about a 2-century gap in between the last mention of Nogai and his family, which is 1300, and the first appearance of the Nogai Horde, which is 1460s, I think, maybe. I don't remember the exact year. I don't know post Golden Horde stuff as well. So, yeah, that's my opinion on it. I don't think Nogai was ever involved with even the Manjits. So that's that. I know some people say otherwise, but I just do not see there being evidence there for that.
So it kind of always reminds me of like all the stuff about like people speculating on connections between the Huns and the Magyars. And I specifically try to go against the grain because I'm just like, I'm through with people trying to make up these conspiracy theories. Because like, we don't have genetic evidence. Sorry, 400 years is quite the distance, and the Huns basically phase out of the picture after the 6th century.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's just exactly, like, you're looking at, the names sound similar. Is it Huns? Hungary? right? You know, it's like using that as and the fact that there was a Hungarian tradition of descent from Attila, but here's the key thing: is that tradition extant when the Magyars first arrive in the Pannonian Basin, or is this something which is only emerging after, say, the Christianization of the Hungarians, the Magyars, and their increased connections with European powers and the greater influence of European knowledge and ideas of kingship upon them, including the histories which mention Attila? Because then they can go, or because then again, it's you're making yourself this new ancestor. You're making this new connection. It is a fabricated thing. It's not. If you could point to sources from the 8th century or whenever the Magyars first appear, and they have some Magyar envoy going, it is us, the descendants of the Huns, returning to take our land or something, you know. But even what we do know about the Magyar history before their arrival in the Pannonian Basin, and you know the travels from the Ural Mountains and all of that. And you look at that and go, well, what would that have to do with the Huns, though? The Huns didn't live in the Ural Mountains, as far as we know. They seem to have passed the step south of there. Like what? It's making the new identities, and I think that's exactly what's happening here with Nogai and the Nogai Horde. I would imagine if you went to the 15th century Nogai Horde and asked them about Nogai Khan, you'd get a bunch of people going, who? if you could speak their language and you weren't, freaking people out because you showed up in a time machine or whatever. But advent of increased access to resources and knowledge and books and the internet and stuff, you find out that there is this figure called Nogai Khan who's very influential and very important in the Golden Horde, and he's a powerful nomad sort of thing, and he also happens to have the same name as your people. Why not? We're his descendants. Sure, it's giving yourselves an exciting ancestor kind of thing.
Yeah. So
that's my opinion on the matter. I do apologize if anyone listening feels I am insulting your family. If you happen to be a Nogai, I'm not trying to. I don't go into these things with the intention of trying to insult and pick fights. All of my opinions are formed off of what I've read from primary sources and scholarship and archaeological materials, and this is what it looks like to me. Maybe there is folklore among the Nogais today saying that do say this, that do say Nogai is our ancestor, we took our name from him. But how far back does this folklore go? If this can only trace back 30 years, 30 years ago we all got access to the internet. You could Google Nogai and go, oh, hey, this guy's got our name. And then that has to be weighed against the alternative explanations, such as the fact of the alternative linguistic origin of the word Nogai, that is in Nogai Horde. The fact there aren't primary sources or anything which are establishing this kind of connection, and just the fact that this is an incredibly common Turco-Mongolian word. But dealing with this sort of thing, genealogies and folklore in the steppe, it's always very messy. Because there are still people identifying themselves by these ethnic appellations, the emotions run high. I'm sure there are Hungarians today who will vigorously defend that they are descendants of Attila the Hun.
Oh, I've encountered them. Yeah. I've encountered them many times, in fact. We even have. I think we've even had we've even played a little bit of speculation up here in Cleveland with the Hungarian Boy Scout troop. I often have to laugh at that because I'm a bit of the I'm a bit of my troops unofficial young expert on Hungarian history. Although I haven't been there in a while, but anyways, well, Jack, it's been wonderful to have you on the show, but unfortunately, I have to get ready for work. So
yes, it's 9 p.m. for me, so I'm just about ready for bed. I got an early day of more writing and researching and sending in assignments tomorrow. So, but it was a lot of fun. Thank you for having me on and letting me talk about my work. Connection troubles notwithstanding.
Well, rest well and keep researching. Keep us posted, for 'tis the will of Blue Heaven.
Thank you. Take care, Janos.
Take care.
Bye.
If you like this segment of the Mongols podcast, be sure to follow me on Twitter at YoungBards101, like our Facebook page at History with Samwise J. Morgenstern, and follow us on Tumblr at GoSJM42 on GoSJM42 Mongol History. You can also support us on Anchor or Patreon. As always, our sources are in the description, and we also have rewards for our patrons ranging from shoutouts to polls. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. And as always, Blue Heaven wills everything.